We're now going to discuss the results of our survey. We surveyed 7,000 virtual students at Fort Hays State University. So every student who was enrolled in any class online was included in the population that we surveyed. We conducted a pre and a post test. We had 285 participants in the pre-test, and we had a drop off to only 168 in the post test. So we did not have participation to the level that we were hoping, but we did find out some very interesting things. Since we're only interested, at least in this phase of the survey, for descriptive statistics, the small n was not that significant of a problem. And what was very instructive to us was that it reinforced some things that we already suspected and told us a few things that we weren't quite sure of beforehand. First of all, we'll get through some of the obvious pieces of information, and the first one is that most students had very little service learning experience, whether in person or virtual, in their high school experience, which you would expect mostly to be in person. But the vast majority of students in both the pre and the post test indicated that they had not had service learning at all, not even in an in-person environment. So one of the things that was important for us to know is that we were beginning to engage students that did not have the vocabulary of service learning coming into the classroom initially. The number of people who did not know what service learning was or preferred not to answer was rather small, and certainly smaller than any of the substantive answer categories. So we're not dealing with a lack of knowledge, but more a lack of experience. In college, is it any different? And again, remember that most of these students are virtual college students, so they either started college in an earlier day or finishing it now, so they may have preceded service learning's ascension into a regular offering in college curricular, or they are new virtual students and they have no experience coming in. And so while the numbers improve slightly in favor of collegiate service learning experience, the numbers are still weighted strongly in favor of students that have had no college service learning experience. And again, this is either virtual or in person, which takes us to the next question that we're going to ask, having to do with those students that only responded that they had had experience with service learning in the past. What kind had they had? Most of the students, again, had had in-person only service learning experience. There were some that had virtual only, and there were some that had both in-person and virtual. But clearly, this is a new area for students to be involved in, so we're in the exploratory phases of what it means to do service learning in a virtual environment. For those students that we asked if they had experienced service learning before, what were the benefits that they derived? And as we can see from the pre and post test, and again, great consistency between the two, even if the small n meant that t-tests did not come out with any statistical significance, the trends were there. Students who engaged in service learning said that they had increased discipline-specific knowledge, an increased likelihood to volunteer after graduation, better appreciations for diversity, increased self-esteem, and an increased feeling of empowerment. So the students that did participate in service learning found a great benefit to it, reinforcing the idea that the virtual environment is a ripe opportunity for us to further drill service learning into. The demographics showed us that most of our students were advanced. They were considered junior or senior status, again in both the pre and the post test. So we aren't just dealing with raw freshmen. We are dealing with students who tend to have returned to college in the virtual environment after some time away for a second degree to complete a prior degree, and So we have to adjust accordingly and realize that these students may not have the vocabulary, the experience that we would hope they would, and it means that preparation ahead of time for semesters where virtual service learning is going to be enacted is particularly important. Our student population was overwhelmingly female among the students who filled out the survey, and considering that one of the benefits was an increased appreciation for diversity, what we found particularly important was that in the overwhelmingly white area in which Fort Hays exists, and our virtual participants seem to reinforce that lack of diversity, and appreciation for diversity would be a particular benefit of drilling virtual service learning further into the curriculum as we continue on. So what can we learn from these service learning pieces? Well, first of all, an in-person student has a much better opportunity of being made available to a service learning environment than a virtual student does. So there is a gap that needs to be addressed and perhaps filled in the virtual teaching environment to bring service learning further into it. But multiple discussion and communication venues must be available, because this is not something that can simply be taught to students as the semester goes on. They must be brought up to speed with virtual learning from the very beginning. Synchronous communication is one of the keys. It is one of the things that is difficult to replicate in a virtual environment, but is absolutely necessary for student participation. The lack of synchronous communication emerged as one of the consistent trends, both in the experiment groups and among student participants in the survey, that they needed communication. The more specific that faculty can be about describing roles ahead of time, the better. The lack of democratic engagement that students may have is offset by the clarity and the expectations that they have going in. One of the strongest things we learned was that multiple reflection points throughout the semester, rather than a single endpoint reflection, was a significant advantage. Also, the need for virtual service learning was reinforced by our diversity findings that we referred to earlier. Virtual service learning thus does provide an opportunity to reach an underserved population of students, and the lack of high school opportunities means it's an even greater opportunity for the college level to compensate for much of that. This concludes my section on the virtual service learning survey conducted for our project.